The time of Passover was drawing near, and Jesus and his disciples traveled toward Jerusalem with a crowd of fascinated people in tow. The people following Jesus had heard of or seen the many wonderful works he had done, and they were eager to see what he would do once he arrived in the great city of Jerusalem. On their journey, they came across two small towns near the Mount of Olives. As they approached, Jesus sent two of his disciples ahead on a special mission. Jesus told the two disciples, "When you enter the next village, you will find a donkey's young colt there that has never been ridden. Untie it and bring it to me. If anyone stops you and asks what you are doing, tell them, 'It is needed for the Lord of all.'" The two disciples followed Jesus' instructions and made their way to the village. As the two men walked to the village, they discussed all that Jesus had told them, and before long they arrived at the village. Immediately after entering the village, they came across a donkey and her colt, just as Jesus said they would. Continuing to follow Jesus' instructions, they began to untie the colt so that they could bring it back to Jesus. As the disciples worked to untie the colt, the owners approached them and said, "What are you doing?" The disciples replied, "We need this donkey for the Lord of all." The owners allowed the disciples to take the colt, and they brought it back to Jesus. After returning, the disciples put their cloaks on the donkey's back and placed Jesus onto the animal. As Jesus rode the donkey, people ran out to meet him, placing palm leaves and spreading their cloaks out in front of him on the road. Jesus continued his journey, and as the road began to go down to the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began to praise God joyfully in loud voices for all the miracles they had seen. "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest." Some of the religious leaders had come out to watch the procession, and they grew angry over the outpouring of joy and praise at Jesus' arrival. They called out to Jesus, saying, "Teacher, you must order your followers at once to stop saying these things." But Jesus responded, "Listen to me. If my followers were silenced, the very stones would break out and praise me." As Jesus came near to Jerusalem, he saw the great city and began to weep. Jesus said to the inhabitants, "If only you had known that today was the day your Messiah had come, and that he came to bring peace. But you will not understand who I am and why I have come. Because of this, your enemies will overtake you and destroy this great city." The people of Jerusalem would only understand after his death that Jesus had come to save them from their sins. Sometime before Jesus took his disciples to the Garden of Gethsemane, Judas Iscariot, one of Jesus' 12 disciples, went to the chief priests and asked them, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver Jesus over to you?" They paid Judas 30 silver coins to carry out this deed. From then on, Judas was watching for an opportunity to hand over Jesus. After he had finished praying, Jesus was speaking to his disciples Peter, James, and John when he saw Judas approaching with a large crowd following behind. The chief priests and the elders had sent the crowd armed with swords and clubs. Because the people in the crowd did not know what Jesus looked like, Judas arranged a signal so that they would know which person to arrest. Judas said, "The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him." When Judas arrived at the garden, he walked right up to Jesus, said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. Jesus looked at Judas and said, "Do what you came for, friend." Then the men in the crowd stepped forward, seized Jesus, and arrested him. One of the disciples who came to pray with Jesus in the garden saw what was happening, so he drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Jesus told his disciple to put his sword away and explained that everything was happening just as it was supposed to and just as it should. Do you think I cannot call on my Father to save me from this? But how then would the Scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen in this way? Jesus then turned to those in the angry crowd and said, "Am I leading a rebellion, that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I sat in the temple courts teaching, and you did not arrest me. All of this is happening so that the writings of the prophets might be fulfilled." As it became clear that Jesus was going to be taken to the chief priests, Jesus' disciples fled in fear of being punished along with him. They abandoned Jesus. As the hour drew near to his death, Jesus took his disciples to an olive garden called Gethsemane. Jesus wanted to spend some time in prayer with his Father to prepare for the pain and suffering he knew he was about to face. As they reached the garden, Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there to pray." Jesus took Peter, James, and John farther into the garden with him, and he became anguished and distressed. Jesus told them, "My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." Jesus continued into the garden alone and bowed down, putting his face to the ground, and cried out his prayer, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup of suffering be taken away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine." Jesus returned to where he had left Peter, James, and John, and found them fast asleep under the olive trees. Jesus said to Peter, "Couldn't you watch with me even 1 hour? Keep watch and pray, so that you will not give in to temptation. For the spirit is willing, but the body is weak." After seeing that his disciples were awake, he walked back into the garden to pray a second time. Jesus prayed, "My Father, if this cup cannot be taken away unless I drink it, your will be done." When he returned to his disciples, he found them sound asleep again, for they couldn't keep their eyes open. Jesus left them to pray for a third time. Jesus prayed the same words he had said before, but as he spoke the words, "Your will be done," for a third time, Jesus came to a place of trust. His sorrow and distress were gone, leaving him fully willing to give his life to save the world from its sins, as his Father had asked him. When he returned to the disciples who had fallen asleep again, he said, "Go ahead and sleep. Have your rest. But look, the time has come. Judas, my betrayer, has arrived to turn over the Son of Man into the hands of sinners." On the day of his death, soldiers surrounded Jesus and treated him terribly. "Hail the King of the Jews," they snickered, as they pressed a crown of thorns onto his head and hit him over and over with a staff. But Jesus was silent. He didn't speak up as they told lies about him or laughed at his pain. This was the very reason he came into the world. Jesus would give his life to save the world from its sin. Like an innocent lamb, he was led to his death. Jesus was forced to carry his cross up a hill called Golgotha, which means place of the skull. It was a horrible place, and there Jesus was hung on a cross between two criminals. Those who passed by shouted insults at him. He saved others, but he can't save himself. If you are so powerful, come down off that cross. But Jesus wouldn't come down. He had chosen to die. He had chosen to love the world so deeply that he would give his life away to save it. As Jesus got closer to death, the sky became black, and from the darkness Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Shortly after, Jesus cried out again, and then died. At the moment of his death, there was a violent earthquake. Inside the temple, the thick curtain that once separated a holy God from sinful man tore from top to bottom. These events terrified the soldiers who were there, and they confessed, "This has to be the Son of God." Late in the afternoon, Jesus' body was wrapped with cloth and placed in a tomb. This tomb was carved from rock, and a huge stone was rolled over the entrance. Jewish leaders remembered that Jesus claimed he would rise from the dead after 3 days. They feared his disciples would steal his body and claim that Jesus had risen. These Jewish leaders demanded the tomb be made secure. Roman soldiers were ordered to seal the tomb and stand watch outside of it. 3 days later, early in the morning, 2 women who had been followers of Jesus went to see the tomb. Suddenly the earth began to shake beneath their feet as an angel came down from heaven and rolled away the stone from the entrance of the tomb. The angel shone like lightning, and the Roman soldiers standing guard fell to the ground like dead men. But the angel proclaimed good news to the women. "Jesus is not here. He is risen. Hurry, go and tell the disciples." The women ran from the tomb, astonished at what they had just seen. Filled with joy, they ran to tell the disciples what the angel had said. Suddenly, a man was standing in front of them. "Good morning," the man said. The women realized that it was Jesus standing before them, and they fell to his feet and began to worship him. Jesus told them not to fear, and then he told the women to tell the disciples to go to Galilee and that he would see them soon. Later, the disciples went to the mountain in Galilee where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw Jesus, they were amazed. The disciples, filled with joy, worshipped him. Jesus was alive. He had risen from the dead just as he had promised. Jesus then gave his disciples a very important mission. "Go, tell the world the good news about me, make disciples, and teach people to obey my commands." And to this very day, the good news of Jesus' death and resurrection is being shared around the world.